hate to break up all the good conversations, but to try to keep us on schedule. For those who may not know, I'm Bob Inman. I had the great privilege, while serving on active duty, to be the director of the Naval Intelligence and a separate highly classified hat of director of the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, collaboration with CIA, then the vice director DIA, then the director NSA, and finally deputy director Central Intelligence, deputy director CIA. Now, you know, people say that's pretty remarkable to have worked against those agencies. Sue Gordon beats that hands down. 27-year career in CIA, in which, to my amazement, she worked in all four of the major, and those are like four totally separate agencies in their way. They occasionally will work together, but my experience in interacting with them, you had to negotiate with each one along the way. She came out of Duke and went to be an analyst in science and technology, which is why I have a particular affection for her. DDS&T is the smallest of the CIA directorates, but it has always been able to attract the brightest talent. And they had special rules for procurement, that they could do things no one else could do. Much as we tried at NSA, much as DARPA tried, the U-2 came out of DDS&T, the SR-71, some of the earliest satellites along the way. So it was a great place to have gotten some exposure, but she moved on to work in each of the other directorates in very important jobs. Then she bounced off to be the deputy director of the National Geospatial Agency, the last of the large agencies, which came about by merging the Defense Mapping Agency and the National Photo Interpretation Center. Jim Clapper, I think, was its first director when they put it together, who's graced this stage before several times. And she's now the principal deputy director of national intelligence. And in a quiet moment of commiseration, this is the one thing of the thing that's off the record and you may not repeat, we both agree being a deputy director is a terrible job along the way. Sue, may I invite you up to join me because I have one other small note to this before I let you speak. If you read the biographer carefully, she was also, while at Duke, a basketball star and was captain of the women's basketball team. And knowing that, our colleagues here authorized us to present the first time ever Texas women's basketball team jersey to Sue Gordon. And on the back, turn it so they can see. Welcome.
Holy smokes, that's awesome.
Wonderful to have you here.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, this is awesome. So Gail Gestenkers, former coach here, is a dear friend. I can't wait to tell her. Wow. How are you? I'm so happy to be here with former colleagues, with brilliant thought leaders. Dan, I'm following most of you, and mostly those of you who carry our hopes and dreams. Seriously, just deal with that. You do. I'm delighted to be here in Texas. This actually feels like home because it's home to my family. My son and his wife, who's from Austin, live in Houston. My daughter and her husband, who's from Lavernia, Texas, live in Amarillo. And my son-in-law's brothers and sisters live here in Austin, and two of them are members of the UT family. One, Andrew Kep, is in the back, so hook 'em horns. Now, I'm going to talk about intelligence in transition, but I'm going to do just a little, participative exercise in order to get everyone in the spirit of what intelligence is about. And in the process of doing, you will find out if you're well designed for this craft. Okay, so the first thing first, yeah, I know. It's after lunch. I'm waking up. Okay. Raise your hand if you like doing jigsaw puzzles. Yeah, right? Totally fun. Now, keep your hand up if you like doing jigsaw puzzles if you don't know what the picture is. All right, some real tough ones. Okay, jigsaw puzzle, don't know what the picture is, quarter of the pieces. Oh, wait, anyone's hand still up? Oh, yay. Katrina, coin. To the woman with her hand up. Okay, jigsaw puzzle, you don't know the picture, quarter of the pieces, the president wants to know what the picture is in 5 minutes because he needs to make a decision. That's intelligence. You think it's like the deductive reasoning of law enforcement? It is not. It is a craft of possibility, and the magic of it is that you do have a craft that allows people to deal with fundamentally uncertain information, certainly. And that is remarkable, and it's important for the future. So Principal Deputy Director of Intelligence, yes, I'm genetically ill-suited for being a deputy, and I apologize to Dan Coates every day. He's a good man. He's done remarkable things for the intelligence community by, in this time, play intelligence straight down the middle that allows the women and men of the intelligence community to keep their eyes in the boat and do their work for the intelligence community. And he was kind enough to select me for this job, and so I'm really sorry that he got me as a deputy. But we have a great time. Okay, just to orient you, 17 agencies of the intelligence community. So you think about the CIA and NSA and NGA. You might not think about the FBI and DHS as much. You might not think about the Office of Intelligence Analysis at the Department of Treasury and all the service intel centers. So we're a big family. The job of the intelligence community, as I describe it, is to know the truth, see beyond the horizon, and allow decision makers to act before events dictate. So that's a pretty big deal. You know, most people wait for the turn of the earth to know what the answer should be. But the value of intelligence really is that advantage that allows you to decide before you have to. It has been that mission of the intelligence community since our beginning in 1947, and it will be the same for the future. I don't think there's anything about that mission that becomes passé. But if we can meet this moment of this time, just as we have every other moment in our past, by adjusting what we do and how we do it to meet the environment and the world situation, then we're going to be okay. The role of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is fourfold. Dan serves as the President's Principal Advisor on Intelligence, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is to ensure that the community produces intelligence that matters today and tomorrow, to make sure that it has the wherewithal, the resources in order to be able to effect that mission, and to make sure that we have a foundation of exceptional talent, which quite frankly is about the only thing we need to do, because if you have exceptional talent, they'll solve all the problems of the community. So think about, when you think about the Office of Director of National Intelligence, we are both for the President and for the community. We are not for ourselves. So the theme of the conference is apt, intelligence in transition. And in fact, it is today in transition, not on a whim, not because we feel like transitioning, not because we love innovation, but in fact, the world is once again in transition. And we have to meet the turn of the earth. I'm inspired to use a basketball analogy. You can forgive me. In fact, we don't want to meet the turn of the earth. We have to actually beat the future to the spot. we want to be there when it's waiting. So here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do a quick romp through the history of intelligence to remind you of past transitions. I'm going to talk about the moment in which we find ourselves and the forces that make it, I believe, so very different for the last few years in which we've been operating, and actually are very different than anything we've experienced in our past. I'll mention some of today's threats, but really the D&I's Worldwide Threat Assessment that's on the open web is a great accounting of those, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on that. And then I'm going to talk about how the intelligence community is going to meet these challenges. And because I never let a room go to waste, I'm going to close by challenging you because you're all a part of this quest. It's a fraught, complex, dangerous, dynamic world, but don't be daunted. If I leave you with one message, it is that we have done big things before. And I'll do a little bit to try and share with you that there is, as difficult as this is, that it is difficult is not new. Its nature is new, but that it is difficult is not new. So allow me to do a little bit of a retrospective, if you would. In 1947, we were formed, essentially, the intelligence community, with the National Security Act after the Pearl Harbor, when it was found that we had intelligence available, but it didn't come to bear at the same time. Bringing intelligence to bear at the same time was our purpose. And so the Central Intelligence Agency was formed in 1947. In 1955, as the Cold War was really coming into great relief, we took to the skies and the heavens to be able to collect the information that we needed to. Admiral Inman talked about the Wizards of Langley that built a U-2 airplane in 8 months, that figured out how to throw something up in the air to take pictures well outside our field of view. And long before we had the ability to bring back the data electronically, somehow we would eject those capsules and catch them out of midair on an airplane. In 1989, we again changed when the wall came down, and for the first half of my career, everyone in the intelligence community did the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden in one day, the expectation was that we understood the rest of the world with the same fidelity that we understood the Soviet Union. This was the time of proliferation and non-proliferation. If you think about the threats, they were nation states. The data we sought was typically held by governments. We hunted for that data. We were data hunters. And we used our newfound spycraft and tradecraft to go after it. Our customers were policymakers and warfighters. In 2001, 9/11, that was a huge change for us. Think about it in terms of the move as a threat as the individual. And I would say we're in the same period, and cyber really came into being because that's where we had to go in order to find the people that would threaten us. So you see the rise of computer network exploitation. And in 2013, Edward Snowden decided to take upon himself to disclose our activities. And so in that same period, you see the decline of that tool. But if you think about that era of 2001 to 2013, the threats were diffuse. They weren't bound by traditional norms of statecraft, and I said the individual was the threat. The data were really only accessible by exploiting electronic communications, because that's where it was. And our customers were policymakers, warfighters, but they were also allies and non-allies and state and local governments who needed to be involved in the fight against terrorism. And we also got seen in a much different light than we had been. We were exposed. And we started having opinion about how we do this thing called national security. So let's talk about the global threat picture today. I was going to use the boiling frog analogy to describe time. There's a great TED Talk. I've mentioned this before. It's my favorite right now. It's Eddie Obang. It's called After Midnight, and his thesis is we all went to sleep, and sometime after midnight, the world changed. And we woke up, and it looked the same, but it was entirely different. And we were struggling to understand how something that looked like we had long understood was behaving so differently. And so that was really the analogy I was going to use. And I think there is a vibrating nature to the world that we're seeing right now, where everything's in play. Certainly our people are in play, and nation states are in play, and they're burbling and vibrating. They're raising in capability, but you do see a hesitance to act because no one is quite sure of anyone else's red line, which could be comforting because you're not seeing action, but I would say it's also worrisome because you're seeing the capabilities rise at the same time. I do not think this is a slow-boil world. Rather, our world is changing so rapidly that the difference is visible day by day. Proliferation and the use of WMD is on the rise. Extremist groups emerge and then transform and splinter. Global alliances are shifting based as much on economic security as physical security. We live in a world where insurrections, failed states, regime changes are near certainties, but they're incredibly difficult to predict when and where and how that might unfold. Nor can we totally understand the forcing functions that underpin them. And we're seeing the reemergence of the nation states with the great power competition. But it's not just those things that are happening that sound a lot like the things that have happened in the past. There are three forces that I believe that are underpinning why this is so different. The first one is ubiquitous technology. Every technology is available to everyone. And that is really different. For so long, think back to the spacecraft, we had such strategic advantage, technology is strategic advantage. Now the one who wins is the one that puts it to clever use faster. And you think about the ramifications of that in terms of who has the least installed base, because that is more able to accept new, or the most focused, think totalitarian regime. So it's a really interesting play when the technology is almost universally available, but it's a question of use that is going to drive success, and those factors are different. It is a world of ubiquitous, it's a digitally interconnected world. And if you think about what that means, that changes the aspiration and the reach and the boundaries and the cost of taking any action. So when I started, Iran and Iraq were concerned about the piece of sand next to them. And now I worry about Iranian cyber attacks. Heck, Antigua is able to buy an offensive cyber capability and use it to influence local elections. And most of all, this digital interconnectedness means that the boundaries that we've established no longer contain anybody. And it started out being geographic boundaries that could be ignored, but now for us it's societal boundaries that can be crossed and things that we believe in that are problematic. So just two examples. Our adversaries, whether they are going after intellectual property illegally or actually conducting a cyber attack, are doing it against the private sector. What's the role of the government with the private sector? That's a boundary we believe in, our ability for the federal government to cross that, and so we're having to figure out how we go. Or think about election security. When the actions were against the state and local, and we believe in that boundary. So how does the federal government come trooping in with Tyrannosaurus Rex feet and try and chase that adversary, or more, know how to help when our adversaries have crossed boundaries? Everything. And data abundance is the third trend. Remember when I said we were hunters? Holy smokes, data is now bane and boon. The answers exist. Holy smokes, they're there if we could just find it, but we're awash in data. Nate Silver's book, Signal and the Noise, says it really well, and that is, in the absence of a story, noise looks like data. So we know the answers are in that, but how do we find it, and how do we find it to advantage? And for the intelligence community, the other piece of data abundance is how much is known by not us. I was talking to the Senate Youth Forum the other day, and a 17-year-old from North Dakota, a high school student, said, "Excuse me, ma'am." That's always so daunting to me. "Excuse me, ma'am. I would like to know your thoughts on 38 North's recent release of analysis and imagery of Yongsan in North Korea and the new activity with the missile test stand, the rocket. Seriously? But the implications for intelligence are really fascinating. I mean, I used to do that for a living. And now before I can get into the office to see what it really is, I'm seeing it on the news, or the Indian ASAT test. You all were reading about the impact of the debris field and whether we were going to have to move the International Space Station. Long before anyone got into the office to be able to do the technical assessment of that, you just have to. And so this data abundance thing, and the combination of the three means the world's knowledge, the world's wherewithal, is remarkably different. And it affects everything from how we analyze developments and predict when they might emerge, to how we share threat information so the elements of the Republic can be protected. But that's okay, we've got it licked. Certainly, our adversaries and competitors have taken note of this, and we too, and I think, John, you mentioned it, the private sector and the government and individual lives, we are increasingly intertwined. And so what does that mean for this transition in intelligence? And more than that, get ready for this, the threat surface of America is now disproportionately outside the government's control. And what do we do about that? And what's the responsibility of the private sector to leave, and what's the responsibility of the U.S. government to support? And how do we think about sharing that information and developing crafts? So we'll talk about that more. Listen, I'll give you a couple of examples that highlight the point and the challenges. I could talk a lot about Russia, from hypersonics to their operations in Syria and what that's given them in terms of real understanding of how you do multidisciplinary operations. I could talk about China from their massive move in economic influence across the world in the Belt and Road Initiative, or their militarization of the South China Sea. I could talk about malign activities by Iran, or the conundrum of Turkey. I could talk about space being now congested and contested and what that means, India-Pac tensions, Al-Qaeda kind of refocusing the manner in which it executes threat, transnational organized crime, development and militarization of the Arctic, North Korea cyber capabilities. I could talk about all of those, but I'm not gonna. I just want to choose two. And again, I'm going to build on John and Ellen's conversation. The first one is China and 5G. So we talked about China expanding their global influence and using whole-of-country approaches in pursuit of economic dominance. They seek to create a China-centric economic order in Asia and erode U.S. influence around the globe. This is exemplified when Chinese companies whose actions Beijing can compel offer 5G communications packages around the globe. Now, here's the funny thing. To be clear, China decided years ago when they lost at 4G, they weren't going to lose at 5G. And you're seeing the effects of that focus. The deals that they offer on equipment to enable this digital future that we can imagine can potentially allow Chinese state-owned firms to provide the basic infrastructure and backbone of data that runs through an entire country, including our own. Legitimate equipment, servicing legitimate needs, and it's great technology. It is. You know, we talk near peer. I will tell you, technically, increasingly, Chinese equipment is not almost. I would argue that some of Huawei equipment surpasses in capability and is lower cost than many of the peers in it. But there are a couple problems to it. It's actually not a technological risk as much as it's a security risk. If our information is flowing through Chinese companies that must respond to China's demands to share that information, what are our counterintelligence concerns and what are the roads of influence they have. And here's the thing, the U.S. isn't in the driver's seat. We will share with our allies, try and partner for understanding, but it isn't the U.S. government that's making these decisions by and large. And so how do we share enough information in order to be able to have people understand the risk of putting equipment on the infrastructure that we're all going to pass? And it's a problem where no isn't going to be sufficient. There are so many times in our past where we could just stop things from happening. We're not going to say no to this problem, and so what's our mean? The second issue I want to talk about, so what are the challenges there, is election security. So in some ways, everything old is new again. Soviet doctrine has been long-standing to undermine democratic processes and certainly undermine our republic. They've long sought to influence politics. Unfortunately, it used to take them decades in order to put together an information operation. And in 2016, with their attempt to influence the U.S. elections, they put that together in weeks to months. And it was a bellwether for the future. In 2018, yes, it was less, but we still saw attempts to influence and attempts to interfere. And we're going to have to deal with this going forward. As I said before, protecting our republic has long been a responsibility of the U.S. ICU, or something we feel for. How do we do that when the threat surface is so different? So what to do? So let's talk about the intelligence community real quick. If our job is to provide clarity, wisdom, insight, advantage, and warning, we're going to have to learn some new tricks pretty quickly in order to be able to survive in this world and to be able to provide useful warning and context against that type of threat. The National Intelligence Strategy, I don't usually cite strategy documents as being particularly seminal, but this is an awfully good one. It just came out. It's unclassified. You can find it on intelligence.gov. It's interesting in that it talks about the outcomes we must achieve, but it has 4 areas of effort that it impels. And these are brand new words I'm sure you're never going to have heard before. It impels integration, innovation, partnership, and transparency. But I'm here to tell you, the nature of those has to be remarkably different. So integration, so certainly after 9/11, we reinvigorated our efforts to integrate amongst all the elements of the intelligence community. The ODNI was formed to do that, and I think we've done it exceptionally well. You heard Amy McAuliffe earlier on a panel, and I think one of the things the National Intelligence Council does really well is to produce timely, relevant, integrated assessments that represent the best the community has to offer. But the integration we need now isn't just putting the information that we have together into one view. We have to integrate our systems. We have to integrate new sources of information. You know, all those exquisite sensors that we developed are looking through soda straws at a world that is producing information. How are we going to bring that in? And how do we deal with data that we don't curate and we can't trust? And how do I commingle it? And what tools do I use? How do I integrate the processes of the agencies of the intelligence community so we can share talent and resources and people and data when each one of our systems was built against a different set of rules? Because while we can come together to do mission, we are a little more testy when it comes to sharing our foundations. And innovation, well, we've been innovating forever, but we typically think about innovation as technical, and there's plenty of room for technical innovation. Certainly in the area of using machines as partners, you'll call it AI, but I tend to talk about the outcome we want. It's how do I use machines in order to help humans do what only humans can do and machines to do what they can do, and to be able to deal with this massive data. So we need to innovate there, and we need to innovate beyond what the private sector is doing, because the certainty we have to have is a whole lot better than nominating which film you want on Netflix. And so how are we going to trust the algorithms that are behind some of those? And what's the information assurance, and algorithmic security that we need to process. How are we going to use unclassified data, and how are we going to produce unclassified products? Because if the private sector is the one that needs to make some of the decisions, tariff lines aren't going to work. And how do we make sure that those products have standing? We need to innovate in the way we attract, retain, develop talent. When I grew up, it's now kind of an aggregate 38 years. People aren't going to stay in one job for 38 years or even one agency with that. How do they move? How do we develop expertise over the course of a career? How do I take the first 5 years and give them the best experience ever in national security and then send them on their way to keep developing their various expertise? We need to innovate in how we manage risk. I think you've talked earlier about security clearance reform because that's the key to being able to bring talent on. One of our problems is not mechanical, it's thinking about what risk looks like and managing that. And how do we innovate in that? And this is a Sue Gordon theory. So my besties know I hate being a deputy, except for Dan Coates. This is a great job. How do we develop new tradecraft? Tradecraft for dealing with the private sector and the concerns that they have. How do we develop tradecraft around writing for people who want to do, not people who just want to know? And what does that look like? If relevance is our game, we're going to have to work on that. Partnership is the third area. Partnership has always been a watchword of the intelligence community. I don't think there's anything we've ever done that hasn't been done with a partner, whether it's the private sector or with one of our allies. But we need to be able to stretch our wings. First things first, partnership today isn't about you help me with my problem. Because all those forces of interconnectedness and ubiquitous technology and data has seen the rise of this weird, pesky sovereignty. With our allies and our partners actually have views of their own about how they want to prosecute this world. And so how do you have a partnership of shared value proposition? How do you have partnership with people that you don't have years of trust, but you need because the problem you're both addressing? And I think counterterrorism helped us with that, but I think we need to go further. And how do we find a shared value proposition with the private sector if they're the ones that we're going to depend on? And how about municipalities? And then finally, transparency is my favorite. The intelligence community is not very good at this. You kind of knew it when Snowden, that was such a bad act, and it's a paid political announcement. I will tell you that unauthorized disclosure of classified information is always bad. Always. But when he decided to take it upon himself to do it, what was interesting was who was conspicuous by the absence of their voice? The intelligence community. We couldn't quite figure out how we were going to rise to that moment and have the conversation, and so there was only one voice being heard. And then the questions raised about what we were doing with data and how we were doing, and so from that point on, we've been renewed in our commitment to transparency. And we do it for trust with the American people because we hold the American people's trust in our hands. They give us special authorities. They rightly demand us to be worthy of that. But we also need to be transparent because warning government won't be enough. We have three great examples of this. First thing, one of the best decisions I think the community ever made was to the unclassified publication of the 2016 Intelligence Community Assessment on Russian interference, Russian attempted interference in our election. And I think that changed so much. Number one was we got the American people who were part of this threat to be paying attention to their responsibility. I think we also are seeing the news, social media, and data companies who will never stop using data start to understand the responsibility that they carried for that. So that decision to make that transparent almost had to happen in order for some of these other things to go forward. Chinese business practices, John, you articulated it so well. I think one of the best things we've done over the past couple of years is to expose business practices that were fundamentally, my word, unfair. And as a result, we have kind of awakened from our stupor nationally about what was happening to us, and so we can start making some different decisions. And then the last is something that is really coming on the heels of that, is a campaign in counterintelligence and security called Know the Risk, Raise Your Shield, that we are effecting with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to go around and talk to companies and municipalities and chambers of commerce to talk about the kind of threats that people are facing from cyber and otherwise, so that folks can protect themselves. So bringing it home, so Steve, we can get to some questions. There's so much to do in so little time. I will say, as intelligence officers, the people smiling are us, because we were made for this. We are people of possibility and people of purpose. And we know we've delivered the impossible time after time. I think our challenge in this world is that everyone is talking the same language, the 17-year-old. How do we distinguish intelligence from opinion? When opinion can be very wise, opinion can be very sound, opinion oftentimes has more grit because there is less structure around it sometimes in order to be doing it. And how do we still add our voice to those conversations? I have a couple last thoughts for you. Here are my challenges to the room. As you pursue your future, our future. The first thing is, see the world for what it is. Don't be a sheeple. History is really important to look at, but the historical framework is not as relevant as you think. And so see the forces that are at play. If you're in my business, I would say realize that so many of the actions are economic more than political and military because of this connectedness. And so see those forces as clearly as we see the others. This is awesome. Moments of quest and innovation are fundamentally inclusive and demand diversity. You all see the movie Hidden Figures? Yeah. What's so cool? I'll tell you what I thought was so cool about it. Here we are in what, 1960s, late 50s, 60s, in the South. African American women were responsible for the most important mission we were pursuing at the time. How in the world, with what we know about society at that time, was that possible? That's because they were needed. So the cool thing when you focus on quest is that you must be inclusive and you must have diversity, because those are the only forces that will help you solve your problem. This is a technical world, my friends. You must become competent data swimmers and at least technologically savvy. I don't care what discipline you have in it. This is a technical world. Particularly if you lead other people, if you are not comfortable with technology, you will not see the opportunities as they emerge. So I'm a longtime spy. Our craft, even though I was on the technical side, Humint is designed to go after intent. The most important element of intelligence assessment, that issue of intent. I will tell you that with enough data, I can infer intent. And so if you can't get to the person you want, are there things that you can look? Be good swimmers and be comfortable with technology. But remember that critical thinking will always carry the day, especially when technology becomes a commodity. Be readers and be curious. It kind of goes to seeing the world for the way it is. Be curious about that. Wonder why. Why are we seeing? I'm a zoologist by training. It is the perfect discipline for an intelligent... You mock. It is the perfect discipline for an intelligence officer. And the reason is, in living systems, you know that what any organism is doing what it's doing perfectly. That's what evolution says. Your job is to figure out what it's doing. See the world. Be curious about it. Wonder why that is so, and don't jump to it. And then last is, national security is not the sole purview of the government, nor is public service. One team. Big enough tent. No problem we can't solve. You carry our hopes and dreams. I'm resting easy. Let's answer some questions. Thank you so much. show off. Which seat do you want?
You can have that one.
Awesome. Don't let me
Right.
forget my jersey. That's not the best part. Maybe it is. I don't know. Might be. Depends on how this goes.
Here we go.
Okay,
Thanks,
ready.
Sue. Thanks very much for those remarks. You covered a lot of ground, more than I can actually follow up on. Thanks also for your long public service.
Thanks.
And,
Never been bored a day.
And yeah, most of us feel that way. Pretty lucky. And thanks for coming all the way to Austin, Texas, again. Sue was here, for those of you who may not have had a chance to meet her then, last November during our National Security Forum. We're trying to book her as a regular here on our team.
I'm in.
All right, cool. So here's the plan. I thought we'd take maybe 15 minutes. We seem to have about 30 left. And we're going to do a little bit better job. I hope this time you guys can throw something at me after 15 minutes so that we can get the audience involved and solicit some more
I'll
questions.
answer in tweets.
All right, all right. Just kick me.
Too soon?
I'll give you fair warning on the first question. Concept of the job.
Yep.
Right? And I tried this on your boss, on Director Coates, on this stage 12 months ago, and he successfully dodged. He didn't answer it, but I know you're bolder than that. So here we go. This came up earlier this morning as well. So the 2004 Intelligence Reform Act, the cleverly named IRTPA, was famously ambiguous, notoriously, I guess we should say, ambiguous on the authorities, the responsibilities, expectations for the Director of National Intelligence, and you as the deputy. Created your jobs, but gave a rather ambiguous description of it. And so, here's the quick rundown just to create the confusing context for your answer. The 9/11 Commission report, which sort of inspired the legislative response, talked about a unified community. They were looking for somebody in charge who was going to unify our disparate intelligence community. Right? The law itself says that the DNI is to head this community and direct the spending of its money. All right? They passed the law. The first DNI, a wonderful diplomat named Ambassador Negroponte, who's been here several times, he said, I'm not really so much a director. He said, I'm really a coordinator of intelligence. That wasn't in the law, but he said, I'm just coordinating. The next guy, Admiral Mike McConnell, who's also been here, Mike said...
Plus your I'm like feeling the weight of expectation
hearing
all those names.
Lots of
and then
churn.
there's Sue. Anyway.
Yeah. Now, anyway, so Admiral McConnell said, I don't have enough authority. I'm going back to the president. I need more. Tell me I can hire and fire these people and so forth. And he got some of that, right? Then Admiral Blair comes along. Admiral Blair's an admiral, and he thought he was the director. And so he started directing, and that didn't end well in that job, or not happily. And then comes Jim Clapper, response, a fellow we admire greatly. And he said, I'm all about integration. And that stuck, because he had a long tenure. And so here you are in Director Coates, and you've got this same set of confusing laws and history here. Are you all directing, coordinating, unifying, integrating, paying out? How do you approach the job?
So first things first, seriously, IRPTA and PDD&I, how come I got stuck with terrible acronyms? So the answer is all of those, but I'll give you a real answer. What's really interesting right now is at the exact same time the world's in flux, and we have done a great job in integrating as a community. If you watched the Worldwide Threat Assessment, the open hearing, especially the past 2 years, you would notice that just the leadership is an integrated leadership team. Instead of talking just about their agencies, they talk about how their agencies apply to the larger issue. So I think we've done the piece of integration pretty well. And I have to credit Jim and Stephanie for that. Different time. We've had 16 years of relative expansion at a time where each agency is looking at the same future with resources available to evolve their mission to be able to respond. And each have added mission at a pretty remarkable rate. Few have invested in the modernization of the infrastructure and fewer still in the new capabilities that even if they had them would be able to be ingested because they don't have a modern infrastructure. So the community finds itself in this world that demands intelligence to, one, be present, and two, be different. And this community that is agency-centric has come to the realization that each agency needs more than what it possesses individually, and every agency needs something provided that they can't provide for themselves. Aha! The opening for our budget authority to be used. And so 2 years ago, we led a process by which the community came up with a thing called IC 2025 that's now pretty reflected in the National Intelligence Strategy. The community came to the same view of its guiding principles, the operating model, and the priorities it needed to address as a collective. And we decided at the ODNI that we were going to use that budget authority to issue different guidance, that instead of having 787 things that were everyone's pet rock and we would say they were all important, as a community we said there were 7 things that were important. We articulated outcomes and we started building programs against that. And this past year, while I'll say I gave us a C- on the quality of that guidance, we did actually move about 10% of our budget to agency priorities compared to 2 or 3 before. I actually also took money from the agencies, a small percentage, 0.75%, from the agencies in order to fund the priorities that we'd said. When I talked to Stephanie, she said she never would have had the guts to do that. And the shocking thing is this year, the big concern of the agencies is that I might take more. So what I would say is that we are every bit the integrator and the enabler and the facilitator, but the new role we're stepping into is a responsibility to lead the community, but mostly lead it to be able to see the whole of what we need to be and to be able to give the agencies the guidance they need to know how to fit in that, and hopefully we'll get rid of some of the redundancy that happened when we all expanded to the same. And the big question, it's kind of the Denny Blair question, is 2, will the community allow us to lead even though it's asking us to lead? And can the ODNI, an organization that really grew up kind of as an oversight integrator, can it learn how to lead, but not in a creepy directive sense, because as we say with Denny Blair, that didn't go well. So ODNI as leader, but really for the community, not of the community.
That's terrific and encouraging to hear. And
well, I don't know. It's 1.5 years in.
Well, it takes me back to the summer of 2004, last weekend of July. President Bush stepped out there, and that was the fight. It was money and people. They thought the director needed control over to have some influence. I'm delighted to see you exercising that.
Yeah, but I think it's born of, I just think it's born of realization of shared quest. Stephanie and Jim really started it when they decided to build an integrated infrastructure, eyesight. And that was the first time that they were, through sheer force of personality, forced agencies to go against their own self-interest to do something for the common good. And trust me, that was a big deal. But now, having wrestled through it, everyone recognizes there's some benefit to doing things commonly.
Terrific, makes sense. Can I switch gears to technology? So looking back over the span of your career, you've done obviously an amazing breadth of important activities. You've always been pretty close to technology. And leading and managing and stimulating innovation technology is not easy to do. It was painful for lots of us to watch in the wake of the Snowden revelations and debate.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was painful to watch me trying to do technology.
No. You watching me do technology would be painful. No. So one of the down moments of the Snowden episode was watching the high-tech industry, the for-profit industry, particularly the Valley and some of these social networking firms, separating themselves from the government and disavowing, and for business reasons or for whatever reasons, deciding that their best place was nowhere near the government, antagonistic to the government. John described a little bit earlier today, how some of these firms now have come to some realization of their responsibilities and starting to take action. Where is that relationship? I mean, for those of us who grew up in the Cold War, it's impossible to imagine U.S. leadership, U.S. victory in that competition without the help of our private industry and our technology. And so can you report what is the relationship between our national security community and these firms who see the world differently? Frankly.
Yeah, so you're talking mostly about the information.
Tech firms, not the Beltway bandits,
right,
not the people that make things.
Term,
yeah.
The information firm. I think it's better every day. And I alluded to it up front. This dawning realization that we're in it together, I think is helpful. I think the government's dawning realization that we can't compel them. I mean, we're not going to long for a simpler time where the private sector isn't going to hold private data, or that the U.S. government isn't going to be restricted in how it uses data. I mean, it's just going to be that way, right? And so I think we're coming along in terms of understanding it. The companies are realizing that they're part of a shared quest. I think some more than others. I think we saw Facebook growing up before our very eyes in the congressional hearings, where it was just like, oh my gosh, you mean I have some responsibility for these? And so I think you're going to see it. I think it's still a tough gig. But there are some of these companies with whom we have really outstanding relationships. I mean, the relationship we've had with Amazon Web Services in terms of building out our cloud, the relationship we have with Microsoft, who's going to be new cloud, is providing some cloud services for us through their Azure Stack and Office 365. So we're coming, I would say, to those companies who haven't yet figured out that we're okay to deal with, probably three things. Number one, technology isn't bad in and of itself. It's not evil in itself. It can be put to bad use, but it doesn't in and of itself have any inherent qualities of good or evil. And I do business with people who swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States over organizations and nations that don't. So that's number one. Two, wake up and smell the roses about who's doing what with your data. One of the really terrible effects of Snowden was that our adversaries used the threat or the accusation that companies were in cahoots with the US government to demand their source code. And so started to realize that that's happening. And then the last thing I would say is we can wait. Because the really great part about America is that these companies, even when they don't want to deal with us, are raising what's available, and they are doing the technological advance. And there's a reason why our adversaries are coming here for our intellectual property and capability, is because of what we have here. So quite frankly, while I would prefer them to work with us, because I think we're on the side of goodness with them, I tell Google all the time, we're in the same business, using information for good. But I think we can still wait for them to come along, but I wish that they would pay attention to what is both happening to them and what they're enabling by being a little bit more naive than I would like them to be. We're trying to share more in the world. That was long-winded, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. So it's a process.
It is a process.
And the trend line is?
Yeah, modestly, cloudy. Oh, partly sunny.
Partly cloudy.
Partly sunny. I'm an optimist. No. It's better. It's better. And and the things that we are doing to share information with them about the world as we see it, that we wish they would see, it's making it better every day. When we don't have unrealistic expectations of how they can interact with us, when we understand that they have a value proposition. Back to my digital interconnectedness, so many of those companies are global companies trying to figure out how to operate internationally, and we want them to, but with lots of different rules against them. So to me, I just think the more we can share about the world they see, and the more they can understand about the world in which they're playing, we'll get there.
Makes sense. You had a number of huge ideas that we could sit here all afternoon talking about in your remarks, but I want to get to the audience. So last one for me.
Okay, sure.
Diversity. So your own career is a testament to the kinds of opportunities that are available in national security for women, men, people of skill and energy, and you've done amazing things. But our community doesn't have such a sound record on this, to be honest. I still refer to it as our community. Fact of the matter is, we haven't done very well in some agencies and across the community in certain demographics. How do you see the situation, and what would you say to somebody who is a student here, perhaps, looking at a career in intelligence from an underrepresented community and wondering whether they're going to get a fair shot, how they're going to be treated, how are we doing it, hiring, retaining, promoting, rewarding people from all equally?
Okay, so first things first, the good news. For now our 8th year, the intelligence community is one of the best places to work in the government. And that's not adjudicated by us. That's adjudicated by, I think, the Public Services Council or something like that, or the Institute of Public.
Yeah, Paul White, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good thing. I think if you look at our leadership of the intelligence community, we have really sound representation in women in senior leadership positions, and I think this is having a great effect for all boats. Because one of the things that happens is that when you start putting in people into leadership positions that don't look like what you thought they should look like, it starts being okay for everyone who isn't exactly what you think. And so everyone benefits when you start recognizing that excellence can have different form. I think that numerically, we don't yet look like America. I am at a loss to explain how our overall population for women are still below 40%, that we don't do well enough with African Americans, that Hispanics we also don't do as well. And there are lots of reasons I can say, but we should look at America, and worse is we tend to hire in a way that looks like America. It's just when you advance through, we don't tend to keep those through our population, and that's a problem for us. And so we need to do better. And we know some of the underlying reasons. I can say the technical reason is all these people are really being competed for, and my security clearance process keeps a lot of people away. I said we needed to innovate in risk management and security clearance. For too long, we have kept away first-generation Americans who have backgrounds that we really need because we can't figure out how to trust someone who didn't come across on the Mayflower, and we need to change it. But those things are changing, but we must. I think one of the biggest things that we're doing that will make a difference is we're focusing on the environment, because the intelligence community is a real mission place. Mission. If you walk through halls of any one of the agencies, everyone is about the mission. And I think mission has covered for not being as inclusive of environment as it might, because everyone is like, well, I want to do the mission, so I'll put up with being treated less than decently. And so we're really focusing on improving the environment. You know, when I think about the Me Too movement, what I really think that was about is we've got to stop it being a choice. I want this, so I'll put up with that. No one should have to make that choice. So we're trying to raise that. But numerically, it's hard. I think we need to recruit in different places. I think we need to keep on being more open about the backgrounds of the people that we have, and we need to make it so that anyone comes in has every future.
University of Texas is a pretty good place to look.
You know, I've heard. I'll come back.
Okay, off you go. Who's got a question for Sue? Sir, in uniform here. There's a microphone coming.
Sam Ellison, 636MI
Hey,
here
Sam.
in Texas. So as the Intel community shifts more towards near-peer and pacing threats, what work do you believe needs to be done to integrate national to tactical intelligence collection and distribution mechanisms? And do you have advice for a ground-up or analyst-to-analyst approach to that?
Intel friend of ours from across the
love
freeway
this.
at Camp Mabry.
So let's see how many questions we can get to if I can answer questions simply. What's so exciting about the information technologies that are coming is that we're going to be able to revolutionize that. You're not going to have to go from tasking to collection to processing to distribution to analysis to distribution again. That's going to be able to happen much faster. And so one of the reasons I'm so excited about artificial intelligence is it'll just blow that up, because it's not just about integration, it's about speed, and we are not nearly fast enough for the time frames we need for modern warfare. And what was your second question, ground to ground?
Just at the ground level, at the analyst to analyst level, is there more that you think can be done for cooperation between, like, let's say, a CIA analyst and one of our Army analysts?
Pick up the damn phone. No, seriously. I mean, it's as though someone thinks that you have to check with your boss to see if I can get together. You know, be really good at your job. See how what you're doing can be used. Have the motto of user help. I'm either going to use what someone else is doing, or I'm going to help what they're doing, and then throw yourselves into it. I am pretty confident no boss is going to say, well, you know, world peace was right around the corner, but I'm not sure that I think Sam should talk to that guy from the CIA. So we got to work it top down, but I will also tell you that those barriers are not nearly so impermeable as they seem.
Next. Ma'am. Right over here. Yeah. Is that Kelsey?
I was shorter.
Hey, Kelsey.
I was shorter
Well
that
done.
time.
Well done. We're on pace. We're going to try to get 5 or 6
Okay,
more.
I'm in.
Thank you so much. My question is a little bit about how we can use current situations to better strategically put the United States where we want to be in the future, and specifically looking right now at the issue of foreign fighters.
Okay.
Is the current foreign fighter situation an area that the United States should step in and try to lead an international effort, or is it an area that we need to somewhat cut our losses and let somebody else kind of take that step?
You know, the coolest, everyone wants to be an intelligence officer. You know, want to know why? We don't have to set policy. All we have to do is pursue the truth as hard as we can to see the picture as well as we might, to understand the landscape, to understand the players, to understand the wherewithal and the forces, to use national security communications in order to be able to talk to our partners and allies independent of policy, because sometimes that relationship, but the choices of where we invest our own or where we leverage others is a really interesting question that I would love to discuss if you and I were just talking about what we think we should do, but seriously, the foreign fighter issue is real. Every time we engage in these conflicts, you are both producing and allowing and thinking about what the force is going to be, but I think that's a really fascinating policy question about the relative risks, relative benefits, about presence and threat. It was a great question. And if I hadn't given you a coin earlier today, you would. Did I give you one earlier? Katrina, pay the woman.
Young man here in the dark blazer with their hand up. Yeah.
As someone from the UK, we're currently having a debate about 5G and the Huawei network. Do you see our continued kind of persistence to that we want to use it, and that despite warnings from the US and our own intelligence community, the government's pressing ahead, will that pose risks to our involvement in Five Eyes and intelligence sharing if we were to go ahead with the Huawei 5G network?
So what a great question. Let's see if I can do it in some hierarchical stack. The future of the world is with partnership. The future of partnership is being able to share data. If I don't believe that my data can be protected, I'm going to be concerned about it, right? So that's the hierarchical. That isn't a threat, that's just a consideration. The interesting thing about Huawei technologies and 5G is at a national level, and the UK has done some really interesting things in cyber, so I don't think it's a dilettante attitude. It's a belief that the risk can be managed and the benefit exists because of the technology, and we're just going to have to figure that out. What I would say is we are going to have to figure out a way in a 5G world that we're able to manage the risks in a diverse network that includes technology that we can't trust. We're just going to have to figure that out. But today, what I would tell you again, what worries me is the fact that they can compel the companies who own the equipment to provide the data back to the government. So it's not an issue of technological backdoors, because I can test for those. And you're seeing in some of the trade talks right now the whole notion of intellectual property and protection of data. So I think that would be the question of, can you manage that risk? But we're going to have to figure that out. Because if you think what's really exciting about 5G is, say, what it can do for Africa or underdeveloped and underserved countries and how distributed it's going to be, and the UK or the US or some others can make some tier 1 decisions about not using that technology in their governmental systems. But in the remote areas with a small municipality, they're going to take the equipment that fits into the fiscal profile they have, and if it's Huawei equipment, I don't think I'm going to be able to say no. So we're going to have to figure it out over time. But governmentally, I think it is an interesting problem about the compelling of the data.
It's going to drive us to end-to-end encryption.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just going to have to solve it out. You know, it's all the things. You know, our networks, we try and protect our networks to keep them clean. You have to presume a dirty network. That's what we're going to have to presume about the world and sort it out. And we'll sort it out. I mean, look at what network companies are doing now and router providers. We designed networks in a way that didn't imagine cyber threat. So once you get into network, you can go anywhere. Now those same companies are recognizing that's a threat, so they're designing the networks differently. So we'll sort that out, because we're going to have to. But in the short haul, I'd consider the cost-benefit trade.
Let's try to get 2 more in here before we move
bad.
on.
I'll do better.
Young lady in the purple top there.
Ask an easy one. I'm sweating up here.
Can you comment on the challenges and opportunities facing the intelligence community for countering the threat of information warfare, disinformation, and the weaponization of information?
And the weaponization of what?
Weaponization of information.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit.
Big question. In 2 minutes or less.
Okay. What's so interesting about the past, I'm going to say 5 years in cyber, is that it used to be a relative few. We thought about it as a technical problem, but now if you just look at it, it is the vehicle by which every aspect of national interest is going to be affected, right? And so imagining a world where there's not cyber action, which is purposeful action in digital space, is going to be small. The idea that the same forces of going after is small. The question is, how do we participate in that ecosystem in a way that engages before we're responding, but actually engages ahead of time? And how do we convince people that have information, as the Admiral said, in order to protect it in a way that we did it? But wishing that that's not going to happen is just something that's true. That's just the way you're going to affect it.
Okay, last shot. Sir, right here.
Okay, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, somebody will repeat it. Yeah. Go ahead, fire away.
Unless it's a bad question, in which case we're not repeating it.
Didn't hear you. Here we go. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you. So recently, a lot of former IC officials, high-level IC officials, have been more outspoken about their personal views on government policy, and as I think Professor Hudgens was mentioning earlier, some of the, for example, intelligence estimates have occasionally run counter to public statements made by high-level politicians or policymakers. How do you see this affecting the public's view of the intelligence community as a nonpartisan body?
So I'll try. There were like several things in there. Let's see if I can do it in 3 sentences. The first is pursue the truth as hard as you can. That's our role. Our estimates, we always try to be the best estimates that we have. We believe in intelligence is an important role, best offered when you have the wisdom and insight that we offer, and then the policy community takes on. I think we forget that it's intelligence and policy. And 2 things can coexist, some of the questions you asked. The caliphate can be defeated. The threat from ISIS can still exist in a different form, and you can decide on a policy not of military presence. And that doesn't mean that you didn't believe the intelligence. So just remember, it's intelligence and policy. And then the last one is, because you talked about formers, here's what I would say. I've worked for so many presidents. All of them are the same. In that they're all very different in how they consume information, how they use it, how they see the world, and the policies they're going to pursue. Each one of them has hated when we provide inconvenient information. Each one of them wishes that we could say something that we can't say. And from my perspective, the difference is it's being played out publicly, but for the women and men of the intelligence community, except when our integrity is being challenged, we know what to do with this. Eyes in the boat, go forward. And my formers know this. I have confidence in the community to play our role. I have confidence in the administration to use intelligence for what it is and still make the decisions of policy that they will.
Join me in thanking Sue for this. Thanks so much. That was terrific.